Please, Auntie, please don't make me do it. I'll do anything else, I promise. Just not the toilet. Please. The little girl's voice trembled, her small hands clutching the frayed hem of her faded dress. Her knees pressed into the cold, cracked tiles, and her eyes wide, pleading, rimmed red from crying, searched her aunt's face for a glimmer of mercy. But there was none. Her aunt stood above her, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. You think you're too good for this? You think you're special? She spat, her words sharp as broken glass. You'll do as you're told, or you'll go to bed hungry again. Is that what you want? The girl shook her head, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. But her aunt only turned away, grabbing the stained brush and thrusting it into the girl's trembling hands. The bathroom reeked of bleach and old neglect. The toilet, ringed with grime, loomed like a punishment. The girl's small fingers wrapped around the brush, knuckles white, as she tried to steady her breathing. She could hear laughter from the living room, her cousins, sprawled on the couch, watching cartoons, their world untouched by the cold cruelty that filled this room. She scrubbed, her arms aching, the bristles scraping against porcelain. Each movement felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of her sorrow pressed down on her shoulders. She remembered a time not so long ago when her mother would sing to her while she bathed, when her father would lift her high and spin her until she squealed with delight. But those memories felt like dreams now, distant and unreachable. Her aunt's footsteps echoed down the hallway, fading into the kitchen. The girl's sobs grew softer, swallowed by the silence. She wondered if anyone would ever notice her pain, if anyone would care enough to help. She didn't know that, even as she scrubbed it and wept, fate was already shifting. Somewhere far away, a storm was gathering, and soon, everything she knew would be turned upside down. But what she didn't know was that everything was about to change. Once, laughter filled the little girl's world. She remembered the way sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, painting golden patterns on the floor as her mother hummed and baked sweet bread. Her father would come home in the evenings, his arms wide, his smile even wider, and she would run to him, leaping into his embrace. Their small apartment was never grand, but it was alive with warmth and love. Every night, her parents tucked her in, whispering stories of hope and adventure, promising that she was safe, that she was cherished. On weekends, they would visit the park, her father pushing her on the swings until she soared so high she felt she could touch the sky. Her mother would clap and laugh, her eyes shining with pride. Sometimes, her uncle, her father's older brother, would join them. He was different from the rest of the family, always dressed in crisp suits, his car gleaming in the sun. He would bring gifts, not just toys but books and puzzles, and he would kneel down to her level, asking about her dreams. You can be anything you want, little one, he'd say, his voice gentle. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She adored him, this uncle who seemed to carry a bit of magic wherever he went. He was busy, always traveling for work, but when he was there, he made her feel seen. Her parents would tease him about his success, but there was only affection in their voices. He would slip her father a few bills, pretending she didn't notice, and her father would protest, but her uncle would just wink. Family takes care of family, he'd say. Then, one rainy night, everything changed. The phone call came as thunder rattled the windows. Her mother's face went pale, her father's hands shook. There had been an accident. The world she knew shattered in an instant. She remembered the cold hospital lights, the unfamiliar faces, the way her parents never came back. She clung to her uncle's hand at the funeral, her small body racked with sobs, but he held her close, promising he would always look after her. For a while he did. He took her home, a sprawling house with high ceilings and polished floors. It was nothing like the cozy apartment she'd known, but he tried to fill it with warmth. He read her stories, made her favorite meals, and let her sleep in his study when nightmares came. But his work called him away, and soon he had to leave for a long trip overseas. He arranged for her to stay with his younger brother and his wife, promising it would only be for a little while. I'll be back before you know it, he said, brushing a tear from her cheek. Be brave, little one. At first, her new home didn't seem so bad. Her aunt greeted her with a tight smile, her cousins eyed her curiously, and her uncle patted her head, telling her to make herself at home. She tried to fit in, helping set the table, sharing her toys, and doing her best to be usern to keep her head down, to swallow her tears, to hope for kindness that rarely came. Still, she clung to memories of her uncle's promise. Sometimes, late at night, she would sneak into the study and look at the photo of her family, tracing their faces with her finger. She would whisper to the darkness, "Please come back. Please don't forget me." But the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Her aunt's demands grew harsher, her uncle's absence more permanent. The girl's world shrank to the size of the house, her days measured by chores and punishments. The only light came from the housekeeper, a kind woman who would slip her extra bread or whisper a gentle word when no one was looking. But even she was careful, wary of the aunt's sharp tongue. Fool. But as the days passed, the warmth faded. Her aunt's smiles grew thin, her patience shorter. Her cousins began to exclude her, whispering behind her back, blaming her for things she hadn't done. Chores became her daily routine. At first, it was small things clearing the table, folding laundry, but soon the tasks grew harder, dirtier. She was told to scrub floors, wash dishes, and clean bathrooms. If she complained, her aunt would remind her how lucky she was to have a roof over her head. "You should be grateful," she'd say, her voice icy. "We didn't have to take you in." The little girl missed her parents with an ache that never faded. She wrote letters to her uncle, but the replies grew less frequent, then stopped altogether. She heard whispers that he was busy, that he might not come back. The house grew colder, the chores heavier. Her cousins mocked her, calling her Cinderella, laughing as she scrubbed and swept. The girl's hope flickered, but it never fully died. She remembered her uncle's words, the way he had looked at her and promised she mattered. She wondered if he would ever return, if he would remember the little girl who once believed she could be anything. She didn't know that far away, her uncle was thinking of her too, that the ties of family were not so easily broken. And as the coldness of her present pressed in, she held tight to the warmth of her past, not knowing that everything was about to change. The morning sun barely crept through the heavy curtains as the little girl crouched behind the laundry basket, her heart pounding in her chest. She pressed herself into the shadows, willing herself to disappear, just for a moment, just long enough to catch her breath. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, her knees bruised from hours on the hard floor. She closed her eyes and imagined she was somewhere else, anywhere but here. But the illusion shattered with the sharp crack of her aunt's voice. "Where is she?" "She hasn't finished the kitchen." Footsteps thundered down the hallway, growing louder, angrier. The girl's breath caught as the door swung open, her aunt's silhouette filling the frame. "There you are, hiding, are you? After everything we do for you, this is how you repay us." The girl tried to speak, but her words tangled in her throat. Her aunt yanked her up by the arm, her grip tight and unforgiving. "You lazy, ungrateful child. You think you can just hide and the work will do itself?" The girl shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks, but her aunt was unmoved. She dragged her into the kitchen, where her uncle sat at the table, newspaper in hand, his face set in a permanent scowl. "Look at her," the aunt sneered, shoving the girl forward. "She's nothing but trouble. I told you, we never should have taken her in." The uncle grunted, barely glancing up. "She's your responsibility now. If she can't pull her weight, maybe she doesn't belong here." The girl's world shrank to the size of the kitchen, the walls closing in as her aunt listed her failures, how she was slow, how she broke things, how she ate too much and did too little. Each word was a stone, heavy and cold, piling on her small shoulders. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but she stood silent, her head bowed, her hope flickering. Her punishment was swift and cruel. She was sent to the basement, told to scrub the floor until it shone. The air was damp and musty, the light dim. She worked until her arms ached, until her fingers bled, until the world blurred with exhaustion. When she finished, her aunt inspected her work with a sneer, finding fault in every corner. "Do it again," she snapped, slamming the door behind her. Upstairs, the girl heard muffled voices, her aunt and uncle arguing, their words sharp and bitter. "She's a burden," her aunt hissed. "We can barely afford our own children. Why should we keep her?" The uncle's voice was low, impatient. "We'll figure something out. Maybe send her away. She's not our problem." The girl pressed her ear to the door, her heart pounding. She felt invisible, unwanted, a ghost haunting a house that was never truly hers. She wondered if her uncle, the one who had promised to protect her, had forgotten her completely. That evening, as the girl sat alone in her small, cold room, she heard the phone ring. Her aunt answered, her voice sharp and impatient. The conversation was brief, but the words carried through the thin walls. "What do you mean missing? He was supposed to be back by now. No, I haven't heard from him. If you find out anything, let me know." The girl's breath caught. She crept to the door, listening as her aunt relayed the news to her husband. "They say your brother's gone missing. Some accident overseas. They're not sure if he's alive." The uncle shrugged, his voice flat. "Well, that's that, then. No more handouts. No more interference." The girl's last hope flickered and nearly died. She curled up on her thin mattress, clutching her knees to her chest, feeling more alone than ever. The world outside seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against the windows. She whispered her uncle's name, a prayer lost in the silence. But as the house settled into uneasy quiet, the phone rang again. This time, her aunt's voice was different, uncertain, almost afraid. "Hello? Who is this?" There was a pause, a crackle of static, and then a voice the girl couldn't quite hear. Her aunt's face went pale, her hand trembling as she clutched the receiver. "No, that can't be. He's gone, isn't he?" The girl strained to listen, hope sparking in her chest. The call ended abruptly, her aunt staring at the phone as if it might come to life. The girl didn't know what was said, but something had changed. Somewhere far away a thread had been pulled, and the world she knew was about to unravel. The days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. The little girl woke before dawn, her stomach already aching with hunger, her body stiff from the cold. She moved quietly, careful not to wake her cousins, who sprawled across their beds, warm and undisturbed. She tiptoed down the hallway, her bare feet numb against the icy floor, and began her chores in silence. Her aunt's list grew longer every morning. There was always something more to scrub, something else to clean, another task to complete before she was allowed even a crust of bread. The girl's hands were cracked and red, her nails bitten to the quick. She swept the kitchen, washed the dishes, dusted the shelves, and polished the silverware until her arms trembled. If she missed a spot, her aunt would find it, her voice slicing through the air like a whip. "Do it again. And this time do it right." Breakfast was a luxury she rarely tasted. Her cousins ate eggs and toast, their plates piled high, while she waited in the corner, hoping for leftovers. Sometimes her aunt would toss her a piece of stale bread, sometimes nothing at all. The girl learned not to ask, not to look too long at the food, not to let her hunger show. She drank water to fill the emptiness, but it never lasted. The housekeeper, Mrs. Evans, noticed the changes. She was a quiet woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, and she moved through the house like a shadow, careful not to draw attention. She saw the bruises on the girl's arms, the way she flinched at sudden movements, the hollow look in her eyes. When no one was watching, Mrs. Evans would slip her a piece of fruit or a cookie, whispering, "Eat quickly, dear, before your aunt sees." The girl would nod, her gratitude silent but deep. But kindness was dangerous in this house. One afternoon, as Mrs. Evans handed the girl a slice of apple, the aunt stormed into the kitchen. Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. What's this? Feeding her behind my back. Is that what I pay you for? Mrs. Evans tried to explain, but the aunt cut her off, her voice rising. If I catch you spoiling her again, you'll be out on the street. Do you understand? Mrs. Evans nodded, her face pale, and the girl felt a fresh wave of guilt. She didn't want anyone else to suffer because of her. The chores became punishments. The girl was made to scrub the bathroom tiles with a toothbrush, to wash the windows until her fingers ached, to carry heavy buckets of water up and down the stairs. Her aunt watched her with cold satisfaction, her eyes never missing a mistake. You're lucky to be here, she would say, her voice dripping with contempt. If it weren't for us, you'd be on the streets. Remember that. The girl's world shrank to the size of the house, her days measured by the ticking of the clock and the weight of her chores. She stopped looking out the window, stopped dreaming of escape. The memories of her parents faded, replaced by the constant ache of hunger and the sting of harsh words. She moved through the days like a ghost, unseen and unheard. Her cousins grew bolder, emboldened by their mother's cruelty. They hid her shoes, poured water on her bed, blamed her for their own mischief. When she tried to defend herself, her aunt sided with her children, her punishments swift and severe. Liar, she would hiss, grabbing the girl by the arm. You're nothing but trouble. No wonder your own family didn't want you. At night, the girl lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant laughter of her cousins. She pressed her face into the pillow, muffling her sobs, wishing for someone to hear her, to see her, to care. She whispered her uncle's name, hoping he would come back, hoping he hadn't forgotten her. Mrs. Evans tried to help in small ways. She left the girl's favorite book on her pillow, tucked a warm blanket around her shoulders, and once, when the girl's hands were bleeding from scrubbing, she brought her a jar of ointment. You're a brave girl, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't let them break you. The girl nodded, but her hope was fading. One afternoon, as the girl scrubbed the front steps, a neighbor paused on the sidewalk, watching her with concern. Are you all right, sweetheart? The woman asked, her voice gentle. The girl looked up, her eyes wide with fear. Before she could answer, her aunt appeared, her smile tight and false. She's fine, she said, wrapping an arm around the girl's shoulders. Just helping out, aren't you, dear? The girl nodded, her voice caught in her throat. The neighbor hesitated, then walked away, glancing back over her shoulder. Inside, her aunt's grip tightened. Don't you ever talk to strangers about our family, she hissed. If you do, you'll regret it. The girl nodded, her heart pounding, her hope slipping further away. The days grew colder, the nights longer. The girl's spirit began to break. She moved through the house in silence, her eyes downcast, her voice barely a whisper. She stopped hoping for kindness, stopped believing in rescue. She became invisible, a shadow in her own life. But Mrs. Evans watched, her worry growing. She saw the way the girl's shoulders slumped, the way her eyes lost their light. She wanted to help, but fear held her back. The aunt's threats were real, and jobs were hard to find. Still, she promised herself she would not let the girl disappear completely. If only someone would see what was happening behind closed doors, Mrs. Evans thought, her heart heavy. If only someone would care enough to help. She didn't know that change was already on the horizon, that the world outside was shifting, that hope, though faint, was not yet lost. Mrs. Evans moved quietly through the house, her eyes always watchful, her steps careful. She had seen enough to know that something had to change. The little girl's face haunted her, those hollow eyes, the bruises that never seemed to fade, the way she flinched at every raised voice. Mrs. Evans knew she was risking everything, but her conscience would not let her rest. One evening, after the family had gone to bed, she slipped into the study and closed the door behind her. She pulled out her old phone, hands trembling, and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she had saved months ago. She hesitated only a moment before pressing call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered, deep and familiar. Hello? Mr. Carter, it's Mrs. Evans, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I know it's late, but I had to reach you. It's about your niece. Things have gotten worse. Much worse. There was a pause, then the uncle's voice sharper now. Tell me everything. Mrs. Evans poured out the truth, the endless chores, the punishments, the hunger, the fear. She told him about the bruises, the way the girl was treated like a servant, the threats and the cruelty. She heard the uncle's breathing quicken, heard the anger in his silence. I'm coming back, he said at last, his voice hard as steel. I'll be there in 2 days. Don't let them know I'm coming. And Mrs. Evans, thank you. She ended the call, her heart pounding. She knew she had done the right thing, but fear gnawed at her. If the aunt found out, there would be consequences. She tucked the phone away and slipped back to her room, praying for the girl's safety, praying that help would come in time. The next morning, the house was tense. The aunt's mood was sour, her temper short. She snapped at everyone, her eyes darting to the phone as if expecting bad news. The girl moved through her chores in silence, her mind elsewhere. She had overheard a fragment of conversation the night before, her aunt whispering urgently to her uncle, We can't keep her here. Not now. Not with him coming back. We'll send her away, somewhere far. Somewhere he won't find her. The words echoed in the girl's mind, cold and terrifying. She knew what it meant to be sent away. She had heard stories of children who disappeared, who were never seen again. Panic rose in her chest, tightening her throat. She had to do something. She had to escape. That afternoon, while her aunt was out shopping and her uncle napped in his chair, the girl crept to the back door. She clutched a small bag, just a change of clothes, and the photo of her parents. Her hands shook as she turned the handle, her heart racing. She stepped outside, the air sharp and cold, and started down the alley, her footsteps quick and silent. But she didn't get far. Her cousin, spying from the window, shouted for his mother. The aunt came running, her face twisted with rage. She caught the girl by the arm, dragging her back inside. You ungrateful little brat. Trying to run away? After everything we've done for you? The girl tried to explain, but her words were lost in the storm of her aunt's fury. The punishment was swift. The girl was locked in her room, the door bolted from the outside. She pounded on the door, begging to be let out, but no one answered. She pressed her ear to the wood, listening as her aunt and uncle argued downstairs. She's too much trouble, the aunt hissed. We should have sent her away months ago. And what about your brother? The uncle replied, his voice low. He'll be back soon. What do we tell him? We'll tell him she ran away. Or that she's better off somewhere else. He won't care. He's too busy with his money and his travels. The girl curled up on the bed, tears streaming down her face. She felt more alone than ever, trapped and powerless. She thought of Mrs. Evans, of the kindness she had shown, and wondered if she would ever see her again. Downstairs, Mrs. Evans listened to the argument, her heart heavy. She knew she had to act, but she was running out of time. She packed her things quietly, knowing what was coming. As she finished, the aunt stormed into the kitchen, her eyes blazing. I know what you've been doing, the aunt spat. You've been meddling, going behind my back. You're fired. Get out. Now. Mrs. Evans stood her ground, her voice steady. You can fire me, but you can't hide what you've done. Someone will find out. Someone will care. The aunt laughed, cold and cruel. No one cares about her. No one ever has. Mrs. Evans left the house, her head held high but her heart breaking. She looked back once, hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl, but the windows were dark, the curtains drawn. She walked away, praying that the uncle would arrive in time, praying that justice would finally come. Inside, the girl sat in the darkness, hope flickering like a candle in the wind. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she clung to the memory of Mrs. Evans's words, to the promise of help on the horizon. She didn't know that the world outside was already shifting, that her uncle was on his way, that everything was about to change. Mrs. Evans walked away from the house with her heart pounding, the weight of her decision pressing on her shoulders. She paused at the corner, glancing back at the windows where she knew the little girl was trapped. She couldn't turn away now. She had seen too much, and she knew that silence was no longer an option. She made her way to the small apartment she called home, her mind racing with everything she had witnessed. She sat at her kitchen table, pulled out a notebook, and began to write. Every bruise, every harsh word, every time she had seen the girl go without food, she wrote it all down, her handwriting tight and urgent. She gathered the photos she had secretly taken, the girl's thin arms, the empty plate at dinner, the torn dress, the marks on her wrists. Each image was a piece of the truth, a record of the suffering hidden behind closed doors. The next morning, Mrs. Evans visited Mrs. Patel, the neighbor who had once asked the girl if she was all right. Mrs. Patel listened quietly as Mrs. Evans explained everything, her eyes growing wide with shock and anger. "I knew something was wrong," Mrs. Patel said, her voice trembling. "But I didn't know how bad it was. We have to do something." Together, they went to the local legal aid office, where Mrs. Evans met with a lawyer named Mr. Harris. He listened carefully, taking notes as Mrs. Evans laid out her evidence. "This is more than enough to start an investigation," he said, his tone grave. "But we need to act quickly. If the family tries to move her or cover their tracks, it will be harder to help her." Meanwhile, inside the house, the little girl refused to let despair swallow her completely. She remembered Mrs. Evans' words, "Don't let them break you," and clung to them like a lifeline. She began to look for small ways to resist, to leave signs that something was wrong. She scratched her name into the underside of her bed, hoping someone would find it. She slipped a note into the pocket of her uncle's old coat, hidden in the closet. "Please help me. I am not safe here."
She watched for moments when her aunt and uncle were distracted, listening for the sound of the phone or the doorbell. She tried to remember everything Mrs. Evans had taught her, how to stay calm, how to hide her fear, how to keep hope alive. She counted the days, marking them with tiny scratches on the wall behind her bed, each one a silent promise to herself that she would survive. Outside, Mrs. Evans and Mrs. Patel worked tirelessly. They spoke to other neighbors, gathering stories and signatures for a petition. They called the school, asking if anyone had noticed changes in the girl's behavior or appearance. The school secretary remembered the girl's absences, her quietness, the way she flinched when someone raised their voice. "We thought she was just shy," the secretary admitted, her voice heavy with regret. Mr. Harris filed an official report with Child Protective Services, attaching the evidence Mrs. Evans had collected. He called the police, urging them to check on the girl's welfare. "We can't wait," he insisted. Every day matters. Back in the house, the girl's aunt grew more anxious. She snapped at her husband, her nerves frayed. "What if someone comes asking questions? What if your brother shows up?" The uncle shrugged, but even he seemed uneasy. The girl watched them carefully, searching for any sign that help was coming. One afternoon, as she dusted the study, she found her uncle's old business card tucked into a book. She remembered the number Mrs. Evans had whispered to her, the one she was never supposed to call. She slipped the card into her pocket, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. That night, as the house slept, she crept to the window and tapped out the number on her aunt's phone, her hands shaking. The call didn't go through. Her aunt had locked the phone with a code, but the girl didn't give up. She left the card on the windowsill, hoping someone would see it. Outside, Mrs. Evans and her allies waited anxiously for news. They checked in with Mr. Harris every day, hoping for a breakthrough. Mrs. Evans prayed that the uncle would arrive soon, that he would see the truth and take action. She knew the girl was running out of time. The days passed in a blur of hope and despair. each one a test of endurance. The girl grew weaker, but her spirit refused to break. She clung to the small acts of resistance, the tiny signs that someone cared. She didn't know that Mrs. Evans was fighting for her, that a lawyer was building a case, that neighbors were watching and waiting. And as the tension in the house reached a breaking point, the girl looked out the window and saw a car she recognized, a car she had once ridden in, laughing beside her uncle. Her heart leapt in her chest. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long while, hope burned bright inside her. The house was unusually quiet that afternoon, a heavy silence settling over every room. The girl was scrubbing the hallway floor, her arms aching, when she heard the distant rumble of a car engine. She paused, her breath catching, as the sound grew louder, then stopped abruptly outside the front gate. Her heart pounded in her chest. She dared not hope, but something inside her stirred. The front doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Her aunt, startled, rushed to the window, peering through the curtains. Her face blanched as she recognized the car parked outside, the sleek, dark sedan that belonged to the uncle no one expected to see again. She spun around, panic flashing in her eyes. "Quick! Get up, go to your room, and don't make a sound," she hissed at the girl, grabbing her by the arm and shoving her toward the back stairs. The girl stumbled up the steps, her mind racing. She heard the front door open, the deep, familiar voice of her uncle filling the entryway. "Hello? Is anyone home?" His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it, a quiet authority that made the air crackle. Her aunt smoothed her hair, pasted on a smile, and hurried to greet him. "Oh, you're back. We weren't expecting you so soon. What a surprise." Her voice was high and brittle, her hands twisting nervously in her apron.
The uncle stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. He looked tired, older than the girl remembered, but his presence was commanding. He set down his bag and looked directly at his brother and sister-in-law. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice steady. The aunt laughed too loudly. "She's out with the children, playing in the garden. You know how she loves the outdoors." She moved to block the hallway, her body tense. "Come, sit down, let me make you some tea. You must be exhausted after your trip." But the uncle didn't move. His eyes narrowed as he took in the spotless living room, the forced cheerfulness of his relatives, the uneasy silence that hung in the air. "I'd like to see her," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The uncle's brother stepped forward, trying to sound casual. "She's probably just shy. She's been keeping to herself lately. You know how children are." The uncle's gaze hardened. "I want to see her, now." Upstairs, the girl pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear. She caught fragments of conversation, the rising tension in her aunt's voice, the unyielding firmness in her uncle's. She wanted to run to him, to throw herself into his arms, but fear held her back. What if he believed the lies? What if he had changed? Downstairs, the aunt grew desperate. "She's not feeling well. Maybe you should rest first, and I'll bring her to you later." The uncle shook his head. "I didn't come all this way to rest. I came to see my niece." "Where is she?" His voice echoed through the house, sharp and commanding, cutting through the web of deception. The aunt faltered, her mask slipping. The uncle's eyes swept the room, searching for any sign of the girl. He noticed the small worn shoes by the stairs, the faded sweater draped over a chair. He saw the fear in his relative's eyes, the way they avoided his gaze. He took a step forward, his voice rising. "Where is she?" The words rang out, reverberating through the halls, reaching the girl where she hid. In that moment, the house seemed to hold its breath, the truth trembling on the edge of revelation. The girl's heart leapt. She pressed her hand to her chest, hope and fear warring inside her. Downstairs, the uncle waited, his presence a force that could not be denied. The time for secrets was over. The time for answers had come. The uncle's demand echoed through the house, reverberating off the walls and sending a chill through everyone who heard it. The aunt's face twisted with panic, her eyes darting to her husband, who stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The cousins, sensing the tension, retreated to their rooms, leaving the adults alone in the charged silence. The uncle's patience snapped. He strode past his brother and sister-in-law, his footsteps heavy and determined. "If you won't tell me, I'll find her myself." He moved through the house, calling the girl's name, his voice growing more urgent with each unanswered call. He checked the living room, the kitchen, the garden, each room empty, each corner devoid of the small, hopeful presence he remembered. Upstairs, the girl heard his voice, so close now, and her heart pounded with a wild mixture of hope and terror. She tried the door, but it was locked tight. She banged on it, her small fists thudding against the wood, her voice hoarse as she called out, "Uncle! I'm here! Please, I'm here!" The uncle heard the faint cries, muffled and desperate, and his blood ran cold. He followed the sound, his heart racing, until he reached the hallway outside the guest rooms. He tried each door, finding them all open except one, the closet at the end of the hall. He rattled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. From inside he heard the unmistakable sound of a child's sobs. "Open this door!" he shouted, turning to glare at his brother and sister-in-law, who had followed him upstairs, their faces pale and stricken. "Now!" the aunt stammered. She was being punished. She misbehaved." But the uncle was done listening. He kicked the door once, twice, until the old wood splintered and the lock gave way. The door swung open, revealing the girl huddled in the darkness, her knees drawn to her chest, her face streaked with tears and grime. She looked up, blinking in the sudden light, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then the uncle dropped to his knees, gathering her into his arms. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." "I'm here now." The girl clung to him, her thin arms trembling, her body racked with sobs. He held her tightly, his own tears falling into her tangled hair. The aunt tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "She's always causing trouble, always lying. We did our best." But the uncle cut her off, his voice cold and furious. "Your best? This is your best. Locking a child in a closet, starving her, treating her like a servant. How dare you? How could you?" Downstairs, the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. The aunt flinched, her composure crumbling. The uncle, still holding the girl, called out, "Come in." The front door opened, and Mrs. Evans entered, followed by Mr. Harris, the lawyer, and two uniformed police officers. Mrs. Evans's eyes filled with tears when she saw the girl, and she rushed to her side, kneeling beside her and taking her hand. "We have evidence," Mrs. Evans said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. She handed the lawyer a folder thick with photographs, notes, and statements. Mr. Harris turned to the officers. "This child has been abused and neglected. We have witness testimony, medical records, and photographic proof. I urge you to take immediate action." The police officers moved quickly, separating the aunt and uncle from the girl. The aunt protested, her voice shrill and desperate. "This is a misunderstanding. She's lying. They're all lying." But the officers ignored her, reading her rights as they placed her in handcuffs. The uncle, her husband, stood silent, his face ashen, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The girl, still clinging to her uncle, looked up at Mrs. Evans, her eyes wide with gratitude and disbelief. "You came back," she whispered. Mrs. Evans squeezed her hand. "I promised I would. You're safe now." The authorities moved through the house, documenting the conditions, taking statements from the cousins, who now looked frightened and confused. The girl's uncle, the one who had saved her, answered every question, his voice steady but laced with pain. He explained how he had trusted his brother and sister-in-law, how he had believed they would care for his niece, how he had been deceived by their lies. The girl was taken to the kitchen, where Mrs. Evans gently washed her face and hands, wrapping her in a warm blanket. The lawyer knelt beside her, speaking softly, explaining that she would never have to go back to that closet, that she would never be alone again. The girl nodded, her eyes shining with tears, her heart finally beginning to believe. The aunt was led away in handcuffs, her protest growing weaker as the reality of her situation set in. The uncle, her husband, was questioned by the police, his fate uncertain. The cousins watched in silence, their world turned upside down. The millionaire uncle sat with the girl, holding her hand, his own eyes red with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry," he said again and again. "I should have come sooner. I should have known." The girl shook her head, her voice small but steady. "You're here now. That's all that matters." Mrs. Evans and Mr. Harris stayed by their side, making sure the girl was comfortable, making sure every detail was recorded. The police officers assured the uncle that the girl would be safe, that justice would be served. The house, once filled with secrets and fear, was now filled with a promise of hope and healing. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the floor, the girl leaned against her uncle, her eyes growing heavy. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. She felt seen, she felt loved. And as the authorities finished their work, as the aunt was driven away, and the house grew quiet, the uncle made a silent vow. Never again would his niece suffer in silence. Never again would she be left alone. He would protect her, no matter what. He would be the family she deserved. The girl closed her eyes, her uncle's arms wrapped around her, and let herself believe in a future where kindness triumphed over cruelty, where justice was not just a word, but a promise kept. The days that followed were unlike any the girl had ever known. She awoke in a soft bed, sunlight streaming through clean curtains, the air filled with the gentle hum of a home at peace. Her uncle was always nearby, never letting her out of his sight for long. He brought her warm breakfasts, sat with her as she ate, and listened to her stories she had kept locked away for so long, afraid no one would care to hear them. Years passed, and the little girl was little no more. She grew tall and graceful, her eyes bright with the confidence of someone who had survived the storm and found her way into the light. The scars of her past remained, faint reminders of darker days, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they became part of her strength, a quiet testament to all she had overcome. She excelled in school, her curiosity and determination shining through in every subject. She made friends who cherished her, and teachers who encouraged her dreams. At home, laughter was a daily companion. Her uncle, steadfast and loving, never missed a chance to remind her how proud he was. Mrs. Evans, now a beloved part of the family, cheered her on at every milestone, her gentle wisdom guiding the girl through each new chapter. The house that had once echoed with fear was now filled with warmth and hope. The girl's room was a sanctuary of books, art, and music. She wrote stories and painted pictures, each creation a celebration of the life she had reclaimed. In the evenings, she and her uncle would sit together, talking about the future, planning adventures, and dreaming big. But the girl never forgot where she had come from or the pain she had endured. With her uncle's support, she began to speak out, sharing her story to help others. The uncle, moved by his niece's courage, established a foundation dedicated to protecting and empowering abused children. Together, they visited shelters, spoke at schools, and worked to ensure that no child would ever feel as alone as she once had. Looking back, the girl understood that her journey was not just about survival, but about transformation. She had learned that kindness could heal, that justice could prevail, and that hope could be found even in the darkest places. She knew that her story was not unique. There were countless others still waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be saved. And so, as she stood before a gathering of families, teachers, and neighbors, she spoke from the heart. If you see someone suffering, don't look away. If you hear a cry for help, don't stay silent. We all have the power to make a difference, to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. My life changed because someone cared enough to act. Yours can too. She looked into the eyes of her audience, her voice steady and clear. What would you do if you saw a child in need? Would you be the one to help? I hope you will. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to change a life forever. Her words lingered in the air, an invitation and a challenge. The story was hers, but the message belonged to everyone. As the applause rose and the lights dimmed, the girl smiled, knowing that her journey had come full circle, not just for herself, but for all those still waiting for their own chance at hope. And now, to you who have listened, what would you do? Would you stand up for the vulnerable? Would you speak out for justice? Share your thoughts, your stories, your hopes. Because together, we can build a world where every child is safe, every voice is heard, and every heart can heal.